Welcome to our morning class here at Oasis. We are so pleased that Richard Ruddy is here this morning. The title of his two-part lecture is The Buildings of San Felipe de Neri. I'm Kathleen Raskob, and welcome. Richard Ruddy came to Albuquerque in 1949 and graduated from UNM in 1962. He's a Vietnam veteran and was a self-employed commercial photographer from 1972 to 2002. He wrote the award-winning biography of Edmund G. Ross in 2013. Which was the winner of the Gaspar Perez de Villagra Award of the Historical Society of New Mexico and the Kansas Notable Book Award. Ruddy is active in several history groups and lectures extensively about Albuquerque history. So please welcome Richard Ruddy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. And thank all of you for being here. As Kathleen mentioned, I retired basically in 2002, and I was a commercial photographer here in New Mexico. And I thought at that time maybe it'd be a good idea if I volunteered my time at the photo archive at the Albuquerque Museum. It seemed like it would be a good fit. And so I did. And it was wonderful, really. I really took a strong interest both in New Mexico and Albuquerque history. So I've had 16 years to do a lot of reading and learn a lot about New Mexico history. So at any rate, one of the things I think you'll learn in learning about things and really enjoying them a lot is that you want to communicate the information. And so, if I didn't have an audience, I couldn't do it, so thank you for being here. So, let's see. Let me do a couple of introductory thoughts. I suppose if you were to go through the catalog and see the buildings of San Felipe de Neri, you might think that you were going to hear a talk about religion, which is not the case. What we're really talking about is history and culture to a great extent. And you'll see how that will work out. There's a bibliography that was handed out that you have. And so I need to tell you that everything that I say today and next week basically comes from already published sources, and these are the main sources that I used for the information for both this week and next week. And I hope by handing out the bibliography that I encourage you to follow up and do more reading on your own, because it's a fascinating subject. The whole idea here is to just tell a story, and when you do a story, you want something that has a spine to it, that there's some constant thread that runs through the story. And so for me, and it was a no-brainer, if you're going to talk about Albuquerque history, particularly history that starts in 1706, then you use the buildings of San Felipe de Neri. So that's what it is. It's basically a story about these buildings. And so it's not comprehensive history by any means. There's a lot of information that's left out. But you get a good story, and you'll get a sense of the history, at least, of Albuquerque from 1706 until about the year 1900. So it's almost 200 years. So we follow the buildings. So I think you'll find it to be pretty interesting. So let's get on with it. I want to start off with this photograph as a way of orienting you a little bit. This is my favorite photograph of San Felipe ever. I think it was a beautiful picture. The man who took it was named William Walton. And the year he shot it was probably about 1912. I'm guessing at the date, because he was here during that period of time. He really knew what he was doing with the camera. I've seen other work that he has done and it's quite superb. And you can see here, of course, the church, and on the right, of course, on the left side, and then the rectory is on the right side. Just a couple of comments about it. The church, this, of course, the same church that's there today. Yeah, it was built in 1793, or at least that was the year when construction began on it, 1793. It probably took a couple of years to build it. It's done, of course, with adobe or terrones, which is like adobe. It's just mud bricks that are cut out of usually swampy areas where the soil has come together and was very dense. So when it dries, the bricks are really quite strong. Also, the first floor of the rectory was built at the same time. The second floor of the rectory did not come along until about 100 years later, or close to 100 years. It was about 1890 when the second floor was built. It's also built with adobe. One other comment about the church itself, in this case, are the bell towers, the two bell towers. They are not original with the 1693 construction. They come along, as you will see. We cover it this week. We do. Later on today, you'll find out that they were added on in about 1860. So that pretty much covers this photograph and gives you an idea of where we can start. I don't think I have anything else to say about it. 1706, of course, is when Albuquerque was initially founded. And I think it's a mistake just to know that date. It's not important if it's just a date. It's important to know the history that comes before 1706. And by the way, the church, as you see it here, is 1793. That means that there must have been another church before that. There was San Felipe. So this is not the original San Felipe church, but you'll get to learn, I think, in an interesting way, what the first church looked like and where it was located. It wasn't located in the same spot. Close to it, but not exactly. But as far as history goes, if you go back 26 years, you get to the year 1680, which is the year of the Pueblo Revolt. And if you don't know a lot about the Pueblo Revolt, it's something that you should know about because it's an important part of New Mexico history and it's extraordinarily interesting. In 1680, there were about 26, 27 pueblos in New Mexico. And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but suffice it to say that the Pueblo Indians who were not happy with the Spanish settlers who were here. There were about 2,500 Spanish settlers in New Mexico at that time. And they did something that was extraordinary. They coordinated with the leadership of a man named Pope, who was he was an Indian from Taos Pueblo, I believe. And he coordinated in total secrecy, the revolt by the people of the Pueblos. Not all Pueblos participated, but nearly all did. And so they had to communicate a specific day when the revolt would take place. And the revolt was not just getting up and saying, we object to the way we've been treated by you people and so on, and march around with banners or something like that. They in fact killed 21 of the Franciscan friars who were in New Mexico at the time, and about 400 of the settlers. So you're, out of 2,500 who were here, that was a substantial number. It was an incredible accomplishment. They managed to do it in secrecy on August 10th, so tomorrow, August 10th, 338 years ago, I think I calculated. I think that's right, 338 years ago as of tomorrow. And they banished the Spanish from New Mexico almost totally. They banished them back all the way to El Paso, and the settlers were gone until 1693. It's a remarkable story, and as we go along, to kind of supplement the bibliography that I handed out, I'll point out some of the books that I think are worth reading. And this is one by Robert Silverberg. It's a University of Nebraska Press book, and I'm confident about recommending it because it is also recommended, and the introduction to the book is done by the eminent New Mexico historian Mark Simmons. And it's a wonderful read. You know, if you're, I bet you're all readers. People who come here are readers. And if you're just one day saying, I need a good book to read, this would do it, because you obviously have an interest in the subject matter. And this is a fine book to read. There'll be some others that I'll recommend as strongly. So this is very readable. You'll enjoy reading it, I think. Now, the guy who brings settlers back into New Mexico is this fellow, as you probably know, Don Diego de Vargas. He was an a Spanish nobleman. He came from an important family in Spain. And he came here, I say here, he came to New Spain, Mexico City, and reported into this is an oversimplification, by the way. He reports into the Viceroy. The Viceroy is the king's representative there in Mexico City. And he said, I'm here to do my part for the king and for our country. And the Viceroy said, boy, have I got a job for you. He had the responsibility then of organizing and bringing settlers back into New Mexico. And he did this by initially getting an army together and coming to New Mexico in 1692 and negotiating with each one of the pueblos. Went to every one of the pueblos, and by that time the pueblo people had overtaken Santa Fe. Santa Fe was then their possession and so on. So he was with them there as well. But before he leaves to come to New Mexico, he's in El Paso. It's April 9th, 1692, just before he's going to leave. And he writes a letter to his son-in-law. And in one sentence from it, he says, I could have done no more than to have exiled myself to this kingdom at the end of the earth and remote beyond compare. So this is how he is describing New Mexico, at the end of the earth and remote beyond compare. And it pretty much was. And there's probably a pretty good description of it. It must have been a frightening idea for him to set out and move into New Mexico and try to negotiate with the Pueblo Indian people. But as far as his description of New Mexico being at the end of the earth and remote beyond compare, it really was. And it would continue to be throughout the 18th century, well into the 19th century. There were no navigable rivers here. There was no communication with any other part of the world at all for the people who were here. Life was extraordinarily hard. They were poorly supplied by the Spanish government in Mexico City. Whatever wagon trains came up here were mostly to bring supplies to the military and to the civil authorities that were here in Santa Fe. And so their life was exceedingly hard, and they had to put up with nomadic Indian tribes raiding their farms and so on. And so I guess the point of this that I'm trying to make is that throughout the 18th century and well into the 19th century, the people of New Mexico, in this isolated place, evolved in their own unique way. So if you look at any aspect of cultural development, it's uniquely New Mexican. And we get to see that more so, I think, next week than we do this week. But if you look at language or art or religion, anything, it develops in its own unique way. And you probably, particularly those of you with this Hispanic background, will probably know of people who have come here maybe from Spain or some other part, Latin America or something, and come here and heard the way people, the language, the nouns and the idioms and so on that Hispanic people use in New Mexico. Much of it is antique, or a good part of it is antique, as far as people in other parts of the Hispanic world are concerned. So de Vargas, at any rate, stays here until 1704, and he happened to be, at that time, without going into detail about it, he happened to be in Bernalillo when he had a serious illness, a heart attack, something like that. He died in 1704 in Bernalillo. And he was replaced the following year by Francisco Cuervo y Valdez. And you know the statue in Old Town. He would become the man who gets the credit for establishing Albuquerque as a community, an Hispanic community, as a Spanish community. It is, in fact, a villa, and we'll be talking a little bit more about what that means here in just a minute. But I, at least at this point, want to say that probably had Vargas had Vargas lived, he probably would have also established a community here in what was known and is still known, of course, today as the Rio Abajo, the lower portion of the Rio Grande River. Good place for farming, easy, relatively easy, I suppose, fording of the Rio Grande and so on. A lot of good reasons to put a community here. And when Cuervo does this, because he's establishing a villa, there are certain requirements that he has. A villa is a special designation under Spanish law. And there are privileges and requirements for communities like this. There are only 3 in New Mexico proper. And we'll chat more about that in just a minute. But initially, he knows that he has to get permission for the establishment of a community like this, but he doesn't really get the permission. And for practical reasons, the amount of time it would take to explain in a letter of some kind to the Viceroy in Mexico City that he wanted to establish this, and then wait for a return and so on, was just unreasonable. And so what was more reasonable was to just simply establish the community, which he did. Now he wanted to get a yes answer from the Viceroy, and so he named it Albuquerque because, and you probably know the story, the Viceroy was Francisco Fernandez de la Cueva Enriquez. He was the 10th Duke of Albuquerque. And so the Duke said, this is fine. He was delighted to have that happen. And so he knows that he probably, the Duke probably is critical and maybe even admonishes the governor in New Mexico for doing something without getting permission ahead of time. But it was a good idea, so it's established. Now, Albuquerque, I mentioned, is a via. And there were, in New Mexico, as we know it today, 3 villas ever. There was maybe 4 in a sense, because El Paso was also a villa. But the first villa was Santa Fe, of course. The second one was Santa Cruz de la Cañada, which is near Española, if you have not been there. It's worth a trip up there. And this is a picture which I date to be about 1880. And you can see the church that was there at that time. And when you compare it with the way the church in Albuquerque looks, it's very similar in many ways. It's a cruciform shape to it, the twin bell towers, and similar kind of peak in the front of it, and so on. And we'll be making very strong comparisons between the church there and San Felipe next Thursday. I think you'll find that to be really quite interesting. The church is still there today, and this is what it looks like now. It was built initially in 1730s, so it's about 60 years older than the church in Albuquerque. And the congregation they have is much larger than the congregation in Albuquerque, surprisingly, even though it's from a very small community. But they're servicing a lot of communities around the area, so they're drawing on a sense, a bigger population than Albuquerque. In Albuquerque, San Felipe has a very small geographic area to draw its congregation from. And so now, one of the requirements of a via is that it be established around a plaza, so it has to have a plaza. There are some requirements about the size of the plaza and so on. There have to be at least 30 families living around the plaza, not individuals, but actual families living around the plaza. It has to have a church, and it has to have a patron saint. And the place where the first church was built was on the west side of the plaza, facing east. And of course, the church today that exists is on the north side of the plaza, facing south. And I'll explain here before the afternoon is out, just it's still morning, before the morning's out. I'll explain how that happens. But they decide, or the people of Albuquerque are delighted with the idea that the governor thinks they should have St. Francis Xavier as their patron saint, St. San Francisco Javier. And Francis was a very popular name in New Mexico at that time. All of the priests, in fact all of them, I'm sure, at that time, were Franciscan friars. And it was a very popular name among men as well, including the Duke. So this is an additional way of currying favor with the viceroy. But the viceroy said, with his counselors, they're establishing a via, and mine is not the ultimate approval. It has to have the approval of the king. And the king at the time happened to be this fellow, King Philip V of Spain. And so they instructed, the viceroy instructed the governor and the people of Albuquerque that your new patron saint is San Felipe Neri, who is the king's patron saint. And so the people of Albuquerque are not happy about this. This may be an oversimplified story, but it comes close to being highly accurate. They're not happy with it And they're in a place that is at the ends of the earth and remote beyond compare, and they don't care what the viceroy wants. As far as they're concerned, this is their church is San Francisco Javier, not San Felipe de Neri. And and they get away with this for a long, long time. Even in the 1730, 1760, there are bishops who come from Mexico into New Mexico to inspect things. And they either don't even notice or don't care that the people in Albuquerque refer to their church as St. Francis. However, and by the way, let me tell you a little bit. I don't know a great deal about Neri. What I do know is that he was a man with a good sense of humor. He related well to people, and particularly to children. He was well known as a priest who cared for homeless children in Rome. But he was actually from, oh goodness. Help me out here, Mary. Where is this?
Italy.
Yeah, well, it's in Italy, of course, but this is,
Florence.
It's Florence, Italy. Yes. We were there 10 years ago, about, and we came across this, and this is a oratory for the order that San Felipe organized and headed. So this, in fact, is San Felipe Neri of Florence, Italy. Okay, so they get away with calling their church San Francisco until the year 1776. So that's 60 years. And then in 1776, this fellow, Francisco Antanasio Dominguez, priest, comes to New Mexico. He's representing both the bishop, and he's also representing the civil authorities in Mexico as well. He's here to assess the conditions in New Mexico, and of course, as far as the churches are concerned, what condition are the churches, and so on. There was a wonderful professor of history at the university who is now retired, John Kessel, who wrote a number of books, and one of his is mentioned in the bibliography. And he describes Dominguez, I think, in a pretty good way. He said he was chosen because of his capacity for incisive observation, his meticulousness, and his candid integrity. But this would cause his superiors to rue their choice. He was too incisive, too meticulous, too candid. Worse, he was a perfectionist. The superiors wanted a report on the conditions in their custody, which they knew were bad, but evidently they had not expected to be told in such painful detail just how bad things were in New Mexico. Again, this isolation in New Mexico, and it's being revealed by Dominguez. Dominguez had a couple of missions while he was here, but the most important one, as far as we're concerned, is his assessment of the churches. But the other thing that he did, and this is an interesting little monument that you can find if you go to San Felipe today. He was to team up with another man named Escalante, and they were to find a route to Northern California from New Mexico, which they attempted to do during the years when Dominguez was here. They basically failed at it. And they took a route that took them up into Utah, is what we know today as Utah, and ended up after months of trying to find a decent route, coming back, and then they came back through Albuquerque. To commemorate this trip and this visit by Dominguez, San Felipe erected this monument in their courtyard on the 200th anniversary. So this would have been in 1976. And it's interesting, when you get a closer look on the plaque, it explains on there how Dominguez, when he was here in Albuquerque, he told the people, you're not St. Francis, you are San Felipe Neri Church, and that's what you will be from now on, no question about it. And he had the authority of the bishop, and that's when the church was no longer, it always, since the Viceroy said it had been for a long time, San Felipe Neri. So at any rate, if you go today, if you go to and walk around on the property at San Felipe, you won't find any monuments of any other kind at all, just this one. So that's his visit was that important, even 200 years later. Now, the story that will give you a much broader description of what's going on in New Mexico between 1706 and 1846 is this fine book by Mark Simmons, Hispanic Albuquerque. Simmons is a wonderful historian. He wrote in his time. He has stopped writing at this point in his life. He wrote 47 different books on New Mexico history, a PhD in history. And this is a very readable book. It's actually lifted from a longer book that he wrote called Albuquerque, A Narrative History. And it's wonderful. It's, again, one of those kind of books that you just really want to find something to read. You should pick this one up. This is the University of New Mexico publication, and it's easily accessible today. Now, one of the important things that, and by the way, I think that Simmons talks about San Felipe and Dominguez being here, and he says that while he's here, he's inspecting very thoroughly, because of his nature. He's very, very thoroughly inspecting the property and finds that somewhere on the property is a painting of San Felipe that's collecting dust somewhere. But in the altar screen, the reredos, there is San Francisco, not San Felipe. He tells the priest, this painting now goes on there. That's the way it is. And Mark Simmons even talks about that. At any rate, one of the really valuable things that Dominguez does is in detail tell us what the original San Felipe church looked like and where it was located. He tells us specific dimensions, how wide it was, how long it was, how tall it was, the fact that it had a choir loft, it had side altars where the windows were located, that it had 2 bells on the church, and so on. And earlier in this century, I think it's in a book that was written, I believe, in about 2002, 2003, by Thomas Lucero and also Thomas Steele, who was a Catholic priest, a Jesuit priest at Immaculate Conception here in Albuquerque, but a fine historian as well. But Lucero was an architect. Both men have since passed away. What Lucero did was take the information that came from Dominguez, and he did this plot drawing of San Felipe as it originally looked. And he tells us that that this area over here next to the church is probably more of a guess on his part. And so it may not be exactly accurate, but as far as the church itself is concerned, it's absolutely accurate to the way it was. to the extent that he does a side view of it, and Dominguez even counted the number of corbels and figas that were in the church. So that, and he mentions the fact that there is a clerestory window, which is a window that goes the full width of the church. It was a small church, wasn't terribly large, and the window was not very tall, maybe 18 inches, 20 inches tall. And the church was located on the west side of the plaza, looking east. So when the sun came up in the morning, it would penetrate the clerestory window and cast a beautiful soft light on the altar. Other than that, there was very little light in the church. There was just the light where the choir loft was, and there was from a window there, and there was a window on the south side of the church as well. That was, and other than the door to get in at the front, that was the only light there was in the church. So now Lucero went one step further, and he put all this information into a computer and came up with this as what the original San Felipe looked like in Old Town. And you can see that the two bells, they were not in bell towers. It was just simply an extension of the front facade with the bells up there. Dominguez tells us this. Dominguez also tells us that these bells were a gift of King Spain. And whatever happened to them, I don't know, but it would be interesting to know, wouldn't it? Dominguez also mentions that they didn't work. The church was in terrible, terrible condition. And of course, it would collapse from neglect in 1792. That's why they built the new church. Now we could go we could get a closer look at what this church originally looked like, because of this picture from 1882, about 1882, by W. Cal Brown. And this is the church at Laguna. It is still there today. And when you look at it and you compare the information that Dominguez put into his report, it's precisely what the original San Felipe church looked like. Now, pay attention to the fact that there is a wall around this church in the front, and that was true at San Felipe as well. This is the book where I got this information from. I think it's fairly accessible. I imagine you can buy copies of it. It's probably out of print. But it's a very thin little book. But if nothing else, you could read this book and look at it at the Special Collections Library for the Albuquerque Public Library System. That's at Edith and Central. It's a wonderful, wonderful library. It doesn't get nearly as much use as it should. So a trip to the library just to visit it is a wonderful experience. But you'll find, I did this talk once, an 1 hour version that covered both everything I'm covering today and next week. It was all compressed into an hour for the library some time ago. And at that time, the library director pulled up, I also did a bibliography, she pulled up almost everything that's on the bibliography from their shelves and had it on display up front. So almost everything that's on there is available at that library, terrific library. This picture also comes from that book. It's not a terribly good scan at all, but what's important here, this is the church at Acoma. It's a bigger church than San Felipe, and of course it is still there today. But what I wanted to point out was, again, the graveyard that's around the church, around the front of the church and around the side of the church. Very, very common in New Mexico, of course. And usually there's a wall that encloses this camposanto, as it is called. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that. It becomes a very important part of our story. Now here's Albuquerque in 1855. This is the earliest visual evidence we have of what Albuquerque looked like. Before this time, almost all art in New Mexico is religious. And that's true of other cultures as well, in other parts of the world, if you really think about it. Most art from the Middle Ages and so on is always religious art. But this would be particularly true in New Mexico. Tomás Atencia, who his doctoral dissertation is on the list, mentions the fact that the people who came back with de Vargas after the Pueblo revolt, some of them were very skilled artisans. These weren't just ignorant people who didn't know anything. There were some skilled artisans who were involved, and they were responsible for much of the art that was created in the 18th century. But a farmer who was also, if he was an artisan, he was almost certainly a farmer as well. He wouldn't get up in the morning and say to his wife, well, I'm not going to do any farming today. I think I'll get my paints and brushes out and go do a landscape or paint the town. They knew what the town looked like. They didn't need a picture of it. But so it's important to know that Albuquerque had a military presence. The United States military was in Albuquerque from 1846 to 1867, for 21 years. And it wasn't like an occupation of Albuquerque. In 1846 is when the Army of the West, as you probably know, they march into New Mexico and simply announce to the people here, you're no longer Mexican citizens. You are now members, you're now citizens of the United States. And in doing that, they had very little resistance. There was nobody that could put up much resistance to a 1,500-man army. So they accepted it pretty well, and he assured the general, General Kearny assured people that their property was safe under the United States rule, and that their religious convictions would not be interfered with. In fact, he points out to them that probably a third of the army that came with him were Catholics. So, at any rate, they established in various places in New Mexico a military presence immediately. And Albuquerque was one place. It was basically a supply depot for other forts that were out in this part of the world. And they got along pretty well with the people of Albuquerque, because it was sort of like Kirtland Air Force Base is to Albuquerque today. It helped the economy. They needed the people for their produce that they produced on their farms. They needed help with building their buildings for their garrison. And that's what you see here. The artist, Eaton, was on the second floor of a building that was on the west side of the plaza. And of course, what runs across the picture here is what we know today as Rio Grande Boulevard, and the entrance into the plaza is South Plaza Street. But it's interesting that the painting was actually done for another book, and I'll show it to you. This is what it actually ends up looking like in the book, because a colored painting like that couldn't be reproduced at that time. So the painting actually went back east and then was used to make this engraving. I'm not familiar with the terminology that it took to produce pictures and books at that time, but this is what it ended up looking like. And whoever it was back east who was dealing with this book thought that the artist was on the ground level, not on the top floor. So he reproduces the fact that you can see there's a chimney here and a canale and what have you, and he puts men standing in there. It makes it a little different from the way it really looked like this. I think what's interesting about the picture is that we see San Felipe as it looked at the time, and notice that the two bell towers don't look anything like they do today. That's done in 1855. This is the book, by the way. I won't say anything much more about it because I'll deal with it again next week. This is a very controversial book, but it is still in publication, I believe. El Gringo, New Mexico, and the People. William Davis is the author. It's really his account of living here in New Mexico for about 2.5, 3 years. He was the U.S. attorney assigned to New Mexico by the federal government. We'll talk more about it next week, but just for the time being, recognize that it's an important book, but also a very controversial one. This is probably more what the bell towers originally looked like on San Felipe, except they wouldn't have that double opening for the bell tower. It was just, you'll see at the top, it was just probably looked something like that. San Miguel is, you know how if you go from Santa Fe, if you're not familiar with where it is, you go from Santa Fe to Las Vegas on Interstate 25, you kind of go southeast and then go back up to the northeast. And right down at the bottom of that route is a road that goes south, and it's not too far south of that point where San Miguel is and still is today. This is what the church there looks like today. And this painting was done by the way, by both an author and a military man, a Lieutenant James Hebert. It was done in 1847. So he was part of that military force that came with the Army of the West. This is an interesting thing to take a if you want a nice ride sometime and see something. You can visit San Miguel and then continue going south to Villanueva, which is another fascinating community. Beautiful little valley that it's in with lots of nice farmland and a wonderful church that you can visit there. Now, 1855, we know the bell towers did not look the way they do today, but 1862, we know that they do look. They did by that time look the way they do today. And this is because Albuquerque was, this little painting was done by an artist who was with the Confederate Army when they came through Albuquerque and occupied Albuquerque for a couple of months in the spring of 1862. You can see the flag is the stars and bars of the Confederacy. And so that makes it easy to date this picture. So this is what he established the fact that those bell towers were there at that time. So we would guess that they were probably put on maybe in 1860. Fray Angelico Chavez, who we'll talk about more next week, a Franciscan priest who died in 1996, I believe, an interesting historian and priest here in New Mexico tells us that these bell towers were probably built by a Frenchman named Folenfant. And the priest who was the pastor of the church at that time was also French, and he was named Trousseau. Oh, I'm going to mess it up. I'll correct it next week. I shouldn't be relying on my memory as much as I do. But anyway, he was a French priest. He was here for maybe 8 or 10 years and played an important role in the way the church and church properties evolved. This is the first photograph we actually have of not only of the church, but of Albuquerque, period. I don't know of any earlier than this. 1867. Alexander Gardner was an important photographer during that era. And he was with a group of men who were trying to find a railroad route through this part of the world, and he made this photograph in 1867. The photograph is negative is at the Missouri Historical Society, and I have permission to use the picture from them. You can see that flagpole was much taller than what it appeared in that drawing, and that was a problem for other people who did paintings of the plaza at that time, simply because it really messes up the proportions to do it. So they made it look shorter, but it was actually 121 feet high. And this is one of the few buildings of the military occupation of Albuquerque that we actually have photographs of. It was probably a little armory that was on the plaza, and the military, the Army used the plaza from time to time for military formations and so on, with the consent of the people of Albuquerque. They were happy enough with it. You can see the wall that's out in front of San Felipe, behind which is the Camposanto, the graveyard, and that becomes an important part of our story. Here's another view of the church in 1867, and when I first saw this, I was amazed, and I thought, boy, what an interesting picture, because we see people, because very often in these pictures we don't see people. And I wondered what they were doing, but it's obvious they're waiting for something, and I assumed initially they're waiting for a bus. Well, buses in 1867. But if you study the picture and realize what's going, you can tell what's going on. The shadows are very long, and the light is hitting the front of the church, so it's in the fall of 1867, maybe November, maybe even December. And because the shadows are so long, it tells us that it's early in the morning. And so what's happening here, clearly in my mind, the priest hasn't come out yet to open the gate and the front of the church for 7 o'clock Mass in the morning, which continues to this day. And in particular, if you're Catholic and you have not gone to Mass at San Felipe at 7 in the morning, it's a wonderful experience because the plaza is nice and quiet, and you'll find that there are not maybe more than 25 or 30 people in the church at that hour. It's a beautiful experience. Here's a picture that I did in 1976. And notice that here's the church, and you can see that it's facing south. And you can see over here that there's a building just to the west of it. That's a convent that was built in 1881. And so here it's 76. In 1976, it's obviously there. Now, Father Steele, I think, gives his analysis pretty well. He tells us that the original plaza ran all the way behind where the church is today, where today we know it as Church Street. And so the plaza, the plaza was much larger, more than twice the size than it is today. So why did they do that? Why did they build the church where they built it? Well, consider that here's the north end of the plaza in 1790s, and if they built the original church on the east side of the plaza, facing to the and the west side of the plaza facing east, that would place that church, the original church, right about here, where the parking lot is in this photograph. And so, think about this. Both the new church and the old church would have camposantos, would have graveyards. And the graveyard on the original church would stuck probably, they weren't real rigid in those days about having squared up corners and stuff for their plaza. It just had to be large, and in fact, Father Steele tells us they were often oval shaped. And at any rate, that church's camposanto, given the fact that from 1706 to when it collapsed in the 1790s, there were quite a few graves there. And they stuck out into the plaza a fair distance. And so when they started to build a new church, they had to deal with the fact that those graves were there, that they were sacred, important graves. And they couldn't exhume the bodies that were there. And many of the descendants of those people were still living there. And so in deference to them, they built the church on the plaza. They figured, we don't need a plaza any bigger than that, so that's what we'll do. And that is likely the reason that the church was built, the current church was built where it was. There's a little drawing that Father Steele put in a book of his, and it shows, here's the church, here's the camposanto for the new church, and here's the old church, and the dotted line here shows where the camposanto roughly was for the old church. I think they stopped burying people, by the way, at the current church in 1854, and after that there were no more graves there. And in 1872, they exhumed the bodies that were there and reburied them at a place that was roughly where the Natural History Museum is today. And so I think that's about all we have to say about that. So that basically covers the material I have for you today. But I want to give you a preview about next week. Next week, we're going to talk about, we saw the clash of cultures with the Pueblo Indians and the Spanish people who lived here in the 17th century. We'll also see that even within the Catholic Church itself, there was a clash of culture. And that would happen when Bishop Blamey arrives in 1851 to establish a new diocese in New Mexico. Interesting story. So you'll learn about him, and you'll learn about this man as well, Jose Manuel Gallegos, who was the pastor in Albuquerque in 1851 when Blamey, and whose biographer refers to him as Lamy instead of Blamey. This is a picture of Gallegos in 1885 or so. So he was 30-some years younger in 1851, and so he looked much younger. Very interesting man, and you'll learn about him. And you'll learn about this man, Joseph Machault, who was also French. Of course, Lamy was French as well. They both knew each other since they were young, and they were sent to the United States as missionaries, believe it or not, in the 1830s. Mashluf would stay here in New Mexico, and this is an older picture of him. In fact, this was probably done in Denver because he becomes the bishop in Denver. So that's as far as we get today. Next week, I think we'll have more pictures and some really interesting stories for you. So that's the end of part 1 today.